The second wife who's owed nothing. What Beckett learned about the marina before the season opened. The security guard's hand closes on my elbow, and a marlin spike knocks off the harbor master's counter and rings once against the concrete floor, a bright metal note that hangs in the diesel air, while Beckett watches from the doorway with his arms folded like a man who has already won. "Escort her off the property," he says, not to me, never to me anymore, but to the 22-year-old rent-a-cop in the borrowed windbreaker. "She's trespassing. This is a family business, and she's not family. She's the second wife who's owed nothing." The bell on the wall behind him, my bell, the brass ship's bell from the Halcyon, the first boat Coleman and I ever restored, catches the April light and throws it back gold and indifferent, and I can smell diesel and low tide and the wet rope smell of the whole 15 years of my life that this boy is trying to steal in a single afternoon. My husband has been dead for 6 weeks. His son is holding a piece of paper he claims is his father's final word, and on it, my name appears exactly once, in a sentence that gives me nothing. I let the guard walk me out. I did not say a word. Because here is the thing Beckett did not know, the thing he could not have known, the thing he was too busy being triumphant to check. That piece of paper he was waving decides who inherits a company. It does not decide who already owns one, and I had never, not once in 15 years, been the second anything. Let me go back. You need to see how a boy comes to believe a lie badly enough to forge it, and how a woman lets him, right up until the moment she doesn't. I was born Elodie Rourke in Gloucester, Massachusetts, in a triple-decker on Prospect Street with a porch light that flickered every time the refrigerator kicked on, and my father gutted fish at the Cape Ann Co-op for 31 years. We were not poor the way people mean it in movies. We were poor the way it actually is, careful. My mother reused aluminum foil. I wore my cousin Dana's coats. I learned to run a diesel engine before I learned to drive a car, because my Uncle Frank had a 38-foot Novi lobster boat, and I was cheap labor that didn't complain. I was good with engines. I was better with numbers. I put myself through Salem State at night, an accounting degree that took me 6 years because I paid for it a class at a time, $1,140 a semester back then, and I remember the number because I counted it in tips. I waited tables at the Landing in Marblehead from 1998 to 2004, and that is where I met Coleman Marsh, who came in one October night soaked to the collar because his mooring line had parted and he'd swum for his dinghy in 54-degree water rather than lose a boat he loved. He was 46. I was 29. He was a widower with an 11-year-old son and a sailing charter operation that was gorgeous and beloved and hemorrhaging money, because Coleman Marsh could restore a 1961 Hinckley Bermuda 40 until grown men wept at the bright work, and he could not, to save his life, read a balance sheet. I read balance sheets. I read his that first winter at his kitchen table on Gregory Street, and I found $61,000 in back fuel bills, a workers' comp policy that had lapsed, and a marina lease he'd been month to month on for 9 years because he'd never bothered to lock in a term. The man was one bad nor'easter from losing everything, and he didn't even know it. "You're going to lose all of this," I told him. "Not because you're not good, because nobody's minding the money." "Then mind it," he said. Just like that, like it was the most natural thing in the world to hand the keys to a waitress with a night school degree. So I did. Beckett was 11 when I married his father in 2006, and I want to be fair to the child he was, because it's the only fairness in this story I still feel like extending. He had lost his mother to ovarian cancer when he was 9. He was a quiet, watchful boy who could tie a bowline behind his back and who slept with a hand-crank flashlight because he was afraid of the dark and too proud to say so. I did not try to be his mother. I made him grilled cheese and drove him to sailing lessons at the Pleon Yacht Club and sat through 4 seasons of Optimist regattas in the rain. And slowly, the way barnacles grow, we became something. Not mother and son, but something with weight to it. He called me Elle. On my 35th birthday, he gave me a hand-drawn card of the Halcyon with Best First Mate written in 10-year-old block letters, and I still have it. And I am not going to tell you it doesn't cost me something to remember that now. The business was called Windward Charters. When I took over the books in 2005, it cleared maybe $40,000 in a good year and lost money in a bad one. By 2011, we were running 4 boats out of the town landing and clearing north of $300,000 because I did 3 things Coleman never would have. I raised the day rates from $900 to $1,600, and nobody blinked because we were worth it. I built a corporate event side, team building sales for Boston tech companies at $4,500 a charter that carried us through the shoulder seasons, and I stopped renting. That last one matters. Remember that one. In 2009, the previous marina operator, a tired man named Pardo who wanted Florida, put the whole facility up for sale. 48 slips, the fuel dock, the little chandlery, and the crown jewel, the ground lease with the town of Marblehead that ran until 2049. Everyone assumed it was out of reach. It nearly was. But I had spent 4 years cleaning up our balance sheet, and I had a banker at Salem 5 who trusted me, and I put together a package to buy the operating company and take assignment of that lease for $1.2 million. Here is the part that decided everything. 15 years before Beckett forged a signature. Coleman was 61 that year, and he'd had a small heart event in the spring. Nothing that stopped him, but enough to scare us both. When we structured the purchase, I sat him down at the same kitchen table where I'd first found his lapsed insurance, and I said, "Cole, if this is in both our names and something happens to you, it goes through probate. It gets tangled with the estate. Your son could end up fighting my creditors, and I could end up fighting yours. Let's make it clean." And Coleman, who trusted me with the keys the first winter I knew him, said, "Make it clean, Elle." So I did. I formed a Massachusetts LLC, Halcyon Marine Holdings, named for our first boat, and I was the sole member. Not the majority member, the sole member, 100%. That LLC bought the marina operating company. That LLC took assignment of the ground lease. And over the following 2 years, as we refinanced and reflagged the fleet, I did the same with the boats. I documented all 4 vessels with the United States Coast Guard's National Vessel Documentation Center. And on every one of those federal certificates of documentation, the managing owner of record was Halcyon Marine Holdings, LLC. Elodie Marsh, sole member. The charter business, the brand, the bookings, the goodwill, the name Windward Charters that everyone knew. That stayed in Coleman's name, and later we'd talk vaguely about Beckett running it someday. That was the part people could see. The love, the varnish, the founder's story. But the boats were mine. The dock was mine. The lease that ran to 2049 was mine. On paper, in federal registries, and at the Essex County Registry of Deeds, everything with a keel or a piling under it belonged to a woman from a Gloucester triple-decker, and had for years. Coleman knew, his attorney at the time knew, I knew. Beckett did not know, and I never told him because it never came up. Because for a long time there was nothing to fight about. We were a family, and families don't audit each other's love. I should have told him. Maybe. I've turned that over 1,000 nights. But you don't hand a teenager a legal grenade and say, "Hold this." And then Coleman got sick again in 2019, and there were other things to think about, and the years went by the way they do. The brass bell from the halcyon hung in the office over the desk, and every June, on opening day of the charter season, Coleman would ring it 8 bells. End of the watch, start of the season, and the whole dock would cheer, and I never once thought I'd be the one deciding who got to ring it. The erosion started small, the way it always does. Beckett went to Roger Williams, dropped out after 3 semesters, came back to town in 2016 with a chip on his shoulder and a girlfriend named Sloan who called the marina quaint in a way that made my teeth hurt. Coleman put him on the payroll as dockmaster at $52,000 a year, which was generous for a 21-year-old who showed up at 10. I said nothing. He was Cole's son. It was Cole's payroll to give. But I watched. The first wrong note, in the fall of 2017, $3,400 went missing from the fuel dock cash drawer over about 2 months. I don't run a business for a decade without knowing what the fuel dock takes in. I didn't accuse anyone. I quietly moved to a card-only system and installed a camera, and the shrinkage stopped, and Beckett complained loudly that I was treating everyone like criminals. I filed it away. I file everything. The second note, Sloan at Thanksgiving 2018, asking me across the table, sweet as pie. So when Coleman retires, does Beckett just take over, or is there like a process? And Beckett, not looking up from his plate, saying, it's my dad's company, there's no process. And Coleman, who was carving, went still for just a second and then said, there's whatever your father decides, and right now your father's deciding to eat. He never liked how his son talked about the business as an inheritance instead of a responsibility. He told me that night in bed, the kid thinks it's a lottery ticket. I said, he'll grow up. Cole said, some of us don't. He knew his son better than I let myself know him. The third note was the sharpest. In the spring of 2021, Coleman had his stroke, the big one, the one that took his left side and half his words and never fully gave them back. He lived 3 more years, and they were hard years, and I ran Windward Charters and the marina alone while nursing my husband. And I want to be clear about something because it matters to the reckoning. From 2021 to 2024, Beckett came to the marina maybe once a month. He was starting a venture. The venture was a boat detailing app called Slipshine that raised $180,000 from Sloan's father and burned through it in 14 months. When it died, he came back around, and this time there was something new in his face when he looked at the fleet. Hunger. He started asking questions. Where were the documents? Who was the registered agent? Did Dad have a will? He asked me these things over the hospital bed where his father lay unable to answer, and he asked them the way you'd ask a temp who wasn't going to be around long. I answered none of them fully, not out of cunning, out of grief, and out of a bone-deep sense that the wolves were circling, and I did not owe them a map. Coleman Marsh died on the 27th of February, 2024, at Salem Hospital, holding my hand, with the last clear word he'd say to me being halcyon, which I chose to believe was the boat, and not just the last pretty word left in the wreck of his vocabulary. I had the brass bell brought from the office and set on the windowsill of his room because he'd asked, weeks before, in one of his good hours, if it could be near him. It was the last thing he touched. We buried him on a Thursday. Beckett read a poem and cried real tears. I'll give him that. The grief was real. 9 days later, he changed the locks on the marina office. Here is how the boiling point actually happened, because it was not one shout. It was a machine, and Beckett thought he'd built it well. On the 14th of March, 2024, I received a certified letter from a lawyer I'd never heard of, a strip mall estate guy out of Peabody named Renfro. Enclosed was a document titled First Codicil to the Last Will and Testament of Coleman R. Marsh, dated the 9th of January 2024, 6 weeks before Cole died, deep in the fog of his final decline. It was signed with something that resembled my husband's signature, the way a photocopy of a photocopy resembles a face. It named Beckett Marsh sole heir to all business interests, vessels, real property leaseholds, and marine assets held by or associated with Windward Charters and its founder. It named me nowhere except one line. To my wife Elodie, I leave my personal effects and the sum of $10,000, she being otherwise provided for. Otherwise provided for. I actually laughed out loud, alone in my kitchen, a short, ugly bark of a laugh, because he had no idea how right that clause accidentally was. 2 witnesses had signed. One was Sloan. The other was a name I didn't recognize, later determined to be Beckett's Slipshine co-founder. There was no notary. The signing supposedly happened at the marina office on a day I could prove, from the visitor log at Salem Hospital and from my own credit card records at the CVS pharmacy on Pleasant Street, that Coleman had not left his hospital bed and I had not left his side. But that's not how it feels when it lands. When it lands, the system is on their side. Renfro's letter demanded I vacate the marina office and cease holding out as an owner or operator of Windward Charters. Beckett had already filed the codicil with the Essex Probate Court. He'd already had a printer make new business cards. Beckett Marsh, owner and founder, Windward Charters, which was a lie inside a lie, because he founded nothing. He was born to a man who founded it. He'd already told the 12 seasonal employees, some of whom had worked for me for a decade, that L's stepping back for family reasons. He'd already told the harbor master's office that I no longer had authority over the slips. And then, on the 3rd of April, when I came down to the marina to retrieve Coleman's tools and the bell, I only wanted the bell. Beckett had a security guard waiting, and he stood in the office doorway of a business he did not own, in front of the fleet he did not own, on the dock he did not own, and he called me the second wife who's owed nothing, and had me walk to my car like a shoplifter. That is where this story began. Now you know how much was under the water. I did not cry in the car. I want to be honest about the machinery of my own heart here. I felt the grief, but underneath it something else clicked over, cold and quiet and almost restful, like a keel finding the wind. I sat in my 2016 Subaru Outback in the town landing lot. It didn't start on the first turn, it never does in the damp, and I watched Beckett through the office window take Coleman's photograph off the wall and set it face down in a box, and I understood that he was going to erase not just me, but his father, remake the whole thing into a story where he was the founder, and I thought very clearly in words, no. I made one phone call, not to cry to a friend, to Boone. Amos Boone had been Coleman's business attorney back in 2009, the one who'd drawn up Halcyon Marine Holdings, who'd sat at the kitchen table and watched Coleman say, "Make it clean, Elle." He was 71 now, mostly retired, and he answered on the 4th ring from his sun porch in Swampscott, with the Sox pregame on the radio behind him. "Elodie," he said. "I heard the boy's been busy." "He's been very busy, Amos. You want me to tell you what you already know, or you want me to be surprised?" "I want you to pull the file," I said. "Halcyon Marine Holdings, the 2009 formation, the lease assignment, and every Coast Guard COD we filed after. I want certified copies, and I want to know if there is any single document anywhere that puts Coleman's name on the ownership of those boats or that lease." There was a pause, and I could hear him getting up, the old man's grunt, the radio fading as he walked to wherever the file was. "There isn't," Boone said. "I drew it. There isn't. Those boats are yours, that lease is yours, and that LLC is yours, 100%, and it has been since before that child could drive." A beat. "The codicil doesn't touch a nickel of it. You can't will away what you don't own." "I know," I said. "I need to be able to prove it to a room full of people all at once, publicly, cleanly. So it can't be spun." Boone was quiet for a moment. Then, with something that was almost a smile in his voice, "The Corinthians opening gala is the last Saturday in May. Whole harbor's there. Beckett's been telling everyone he'll ring in the season as the new owner of Windward. A pause. That what you're thinking? That's what I'm thinking. Elodie, he said gently, you understand you could do this Monday morning in a lawyer's office. Quiet, no audience, same result. He walked me off my own dock in front of my crew, I said, and called me the second wife who's owed nothing. He did it loud, Amos. I'll answer him at the same volume, once and never again. That's not the law talking. No, I said, that part's just me. I did not fall apart. I made lists. Over the next 7 weeks, I did the unglamorous work that wins. The work Beckett never understood was even happening, because he'd already redecorated the office and put his own name on the door and started spending money the business didn't clear yet. First, the documents. Boone pulled certified copies of the Halcyon Marine Holdings operating agreement, the 2009 lease assignment recorded at Essex South Registry, and the killer, the thing so simple it's almost boring, the 4 current United States Coast Guard certificates of documentation for the vessels, the Harriet Lane, the Mary Meeting, the Petrel, and the 52-foot flagship, the Cordelia. Every certificate, plain federal boilerplate, listed the managing owner as Halcyon Marine Holdings LLC. A certificate of documentation is not a matter of opinion. It's not a will you can dispute in probate court over 18 months. It is the United States government's answer to the question, who owns this boat? And it does not care how sad the funeral was. Second, the forgery. I did not need to prove the codicil was forged to win. I only needed to prove I owned everything it tried to give away. But I wanted the room to know exactly what he'd done. So Boone quietly engaged a forensic document examiner in Boston, a former state police question documents analyst named Priya Vance, for a flat $6,500. She compared the codicil signature to 9 verified Coleman Marsh signatures from 2019 to 2023, and to the medical records showing his post-stroke motor decline. Her report ran 11 pages. Her conclusion, in the language of her trade, was that the question signature showed no evidence of the tremor, micrographia, and letter formation breakdown consistent in all contemporaneous known signatures, which is a scientist's careful way of saying a healthy hand signed a sick man's name. She also flagged that the codicil's font was a Microsoft update not released until March 2024. The document claimed to be from January. Beckett had forged it and not even checked the calendar on his own software. Third, the witnesses. Sign Aldis, the harbor master, and the fourth piece of this, and the one I'll never fully be able to repay. I have to stop and tell you about Sign, because the allies matter more than the enemy in the end. Sign Aldis had been Marblehead's assistant harbor master since 2013 and harbor master since 2020. A broad-shouldered woman of 60 with white hair she cut herself and a voice that could carry across a mooring field in a gale without a radio. She'd known Coleman for 30 years. She'd known me for 15. And when Beckett's lawyer sent the harbor master's office that letter, claiming I no longer had authority over the slips, Sign did something quiet and enormous. She didn't act on it. She called me instead. Elle, she said, standing in my kitchen on the 5th of April with her hat in her hands. The boy came in with a piece of paper and told me you were out. I've got the actual lease assignment in my files from 2009 because the town keeps a copy, and it's got your company on it, not his, not Cole's. So I told him I'd need to consult town council before I changed a single slip assignment. She set her jaw. I've been slow walking a 29-year-old for 3 weeks. I can be a lot slower, but you need to end it because he's telling the fuel supplier and the insurance company he's the owner, and one of these days somebody's going to believe him and sign something, and then it's a mess for everyone. I took her hands. They were cold and rope rough. I'm going to end it, Signa, at the gala, and I need you there with the town's copy of the lease, willing to say out loud what you just said to me. She was quiet. Then, "Cole rang that bell 19 years running. I stood on the dock for every one." She looked at me. "The boy wants to ring it this year like he earned it." A single nod. "I'll be there. Bring the paper. I'll bring mine." That is a conscience witness. Not a lawyer, not a weapon. A woman who kept a copy of the truth in a filing cabinet for 15 years and would not act against it, no matter who waved what. Fourth, timing and restraint. This was the hardest part, and it's the part I'm proudest of. For 7 weeks, Beckett did everything wrong in public, and I did nothing in public. He posted photos of his fleet. He gave a puff-piece interview to the Marblehead Reporter as the next-generation owner carrying on his father's legacy. He booked charters, took deposits, actual customer money, thousands of dollars, for boats he did not own, which, Boone noted dryly, was going to become his personal legal problem and not mine. I let him. Every card he played built the height he'd fall from. My accountant's discipline turned out to be a tactical weapon. I simply let the truth compound, like interest, in a vault only I could open. The Corinthian Classic season opening gala is held the last Saturday in May in a white tent on the lawn above the harbor. 300 people, string lights, a raw bar, and a tradition older than any of us. At sunset, the season is rung in on the brass bell of a founding vessel, and for 19 years that had been the Halcyon's bell, and Coleman had rung it, and this year Beckett Marsh had arranged, I confirmed this through Cigna, to ring it himself, in front of the whole harbor, as the new owner of Windward Charters. He'd even had the bell brought down from the office and mounted on a little varnished stand by the podium. My bell, our bell, front and center, so everyone could watch him take the last thing his father touched and use it to crown himself. I let him set the stage. Then I walked into it. I wore navy. I brought a leather portfolio. I brought Boone in a seersucker suit 40 years old, and I brought Cigna in her dress harbormaster uniform, and I brought Priya Vance's 11-page report in a sealed envelope I hoped I wouldn't have to open, but was glad to be holding. The Commodore, a decent man named Hollis Trant, was mid-introduction when I reached the edge of the light. And this year marks a passing of the watch as Windward Charters welcomes its new owner, carrying forward Coleman Marsh's "Commodore," I said, not loud. But the tent has good acoustics, and 300 people turned, and I watched Beckett's face find me in the crowd and do something complicated. Before Mr. Marsh rings that bell as the owner of a company, the harbor should know who owns it. It'll take 90 seconds, and then I'll get out of your evening. Hollis Trant, God bless a careful man, said, "Elodie, of course." He'd known Coleman too. Beckett recovered fast. I'll grant him nerve. He laughed, that easy dockside laugh, and said into the mic, "Folks, this is my stepmother, and I'm sorry. It's been a hard spring for her. Grief does strange things." A few sympathetic murmurs, the room tilting his way, the system siding with the man holding the microphone. "She's not well, and this really isn't the Cordelia," I said over him, opening the portfolio. 52 feet, your flagship. United States Coast Guard official number 1198246. I held up the certificate, and the string lights caught the federal seal. Certificate of Documentation, Managing Owner, Halcyon Marine Holdings, LLC. I set it on the podium. The Petrel, another sheet. The Merry Meeting, the Harriet Lane, 4 boats, 4 federal documents, same owner on every one. Not Windward Charters, not Coleman Marsh, not you, Beckett. I laid them down one at a time, and the sound they made was the only sound in the tent. Halcyon Marine Holdings, LLC, sole member, Elodie Marsh, me. Since 2011. The laugh was gone from his face. That's the boats. The company's still... The lease. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The ground lease with the town of Marblehead running to 2049 on 48 slips and the fuel dock your customer's money runs through. Assigned in 2009 to Halcyon Marine Holdings. I turned my head. Harbormaster Aldous, does the town hold a copy of that assignment? Sign stepped one pace into the light, in full uniform, and her voice carried without a microphone the way it was built to. It does. I pulled it myself. The leaseholder of record is Halcyon Marine Holdings, LLC. It has been for 15 years. There is no other name on it, and no will or codicil filed in any court can change a lease the man never held. She looked at Beckett, not unkindly, which was somehow worse. Son, I told you in April I'd need to check. I checked. Somebody near the raw bar said softly, "Oh, just that. Oh." 300 people recalculating at once. So here is what your codicil does, I said, and I finally turned all the way to Beckett and I let him have it plain. It's a will. A will decides who gets a person's things. Your father's things were his truck, his tools, his half of a house, and his personal effects. And those, Beckett, those you can have. I don't want them. They're yours. But you cannot inherit what your father did not own. He didn't own these boats. He didn't own this lease. He owned a name and a reputation and the love of a lot of people in this tent. And you have spent 3 months forging documents to steal a company that was never his to leave you. That's a lie, his voice cracked on it. You tricked him. You made him sign. He signed nothing to me. I set the last envelope on the podium, unopened, Pre-Avance's seal facing him. But you signed something as him. January 9th. Your witness was your girlfriend. There was no notary. And the typeface on your father's dying wish comes from a software update that Microsoft released in March, 6 weeks after the date you put on it, and 11 days after we buried him. I tapped the envelope once. There's a forensic examiner's report in here, with your father's medical records, and 9 of his real signatures. I brought it in case you wanted to keep pretending. Do you want to keep pretending, Beckett? He did not. I have watched a man drain of blood before. I found Coleman after his stroke, and this was that same gray, except this one had done it to himself. Beckett Marsh stood in the white tent in his blazer with his brand new business cards in his pocket, owner and founder, and he understood, all at once, in front of 300 people and the entire harbor and his father's oldest friends, that he owned nothing, had stolen from a dead man, defrauded charter customers of their deposits, and committed a felony badly enough that a font gave him away. Sloane was already moving toward the parking lot. She did not look back at him. I noticed that. I file everything, Elle, he said, and his voice was 11 years old again, the boy with the hand-crank flashlight. Elle, please, not here, please. And for one breath, one single breath, the something with weight to it that we'd built over 4 rainy seasons of optimist regattas reached up out of the past and put its hand on my throat. I let it stay there one breath. Then I let it go. You had a family, I said quietly, just for him, though the tent was so silent it carried anyway. You didn't have to steal it. It was going to be yours. You just had to wait and be decent, and it would have come to you like the tide. Instead, you called me the second wife who's owed nothing. I picked up the 4 Coast Guard certificates and squared them against the podium, tap, like a woman who has closed 10,000 ledgers. It turns out I'm the only wife who's owed everything. And I own it outright. I turned to Commodore Trant. I'm sorry to interrupt your gala. Windward Charters and its fleet and this marina will open for the season under their actual owner, which is me, and they'll open on time, and every deposit this young man took will be honored, because I honor my customers even when my family doesn't. A pause. Now please, the season should be rung in properly. Boone drove Beckett home before the police needed to be a public thing. The fraud charges the district attorney filed in July were their own quiet machine, and not mine to run. I never pressed the family angle. I didn't have to. The font did it. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts does not need a stepmother's help to prosecute a forged will, and I gave it none and asked it for nothing but the truth, which I already had. Here is the part I keep, the part that isn't about him at all. The marina opened on the first Saturday in June 2024, on time, all 4 boats in the water, all 48 slips full. I kept the whole crew, including the 2 kids who'd walked me to my car in April, on Beckett's orders. They'd been scared and 22, and I don't hold a windbreaker against a boy who needs a paycheck. I gave Signe Aldis the use of the Cordelia for a week in September, no charge, for her and her wife's 30th anniversary, and when she tried to refuse, I told her the leaseholder of record had made a decision, and there was no will that could change it, and she laughed until she had to sit down. Boone I put on a small permanent retainer he doesn't need and won't cash the checks for. We have dinner the first Tuesday of every month at the landing, at the table where I once waited on his old friend, and he tells me Coleman would have been proud, and I let myself believe him about half the time, which is the most I can manage. Beckett left town. Last I heard, he was in Portsmouth, working at a boatyard, actually working, sanding hulls, and I found I could not summon anything about it. Not satisfaction and not sorrow, just a flat, calm sea. He's not my son. He never quite was. But I did not take his father's tools. I had them boxed and mailed to that boatyard in Portsmouth with no note, because a man should have his father's tools, even if he doesn't deserve his father's boats. And I decided the difference between us was going to be that I could tell those 2 things apart. On opening day, I stood on the town landing at sunset with my whole crew and half the harbor, and Signe was there, and Boone in his ancient seersucker, and the brass bell from the Halcyon, the first boat Coleman and I ever restored, the bell his hand last touched on a hospital windowsill, hung on its stand, gone gold in the low light, smelling of the brasso I'd polished it with that morning, and, underneath, of 15 years of salt. I put my hand on it. It was warm from the sun. 19 years, Coleman rang it. This was the 20th. Second wife who's owed nothing, I said, to no one, to the water, to the man who wasn't there. Then I rang the bell, 8 bells, end of the watch and start of the season, and the whole harbor cheered, and windward charters opened for the summer under the only name that had ever really owned it.